Here we go. Okay, so it's being recorded, so don't ask any questions that I don't know the answer to, because then people are going to find out that I don't know the answer. No, I'm kidding. In any case, you can ask any question you like. In any case, we had the story with Chana, the prayer of Chana. We had questions on that story. How come Eli, the high priest, misjudges her so dramatically from thinking that she's just intoxicated and drunk? He thinks that she's intoxicated and drunk instead of realizing how sincere she is. Why do we need to read about this? Why is that part of the story, part of the Haftorah that we read every year? Especially that the Torah is careful not to say anything negative about people unless, of course, there's a lesson. But if there's no lesson, if there's no purpose, there would be no point in saying it. So, of course, that will lead us to the discussion, to the idea that there is a purpose. We need to hear about Eli misjudging her. That we shifted the conversation and we started asking, okay, let's think about Rosh Hashanah in general. And we said Rosh Hashanah in general, it seems that there are contradictory themes. What are the contradictory themes? On one hand, we try to be very spiritual. On the other hand, we're asking for all our needs. On one hand, in other words, we're trying to be spiritual. Excuse me. We're trying to be spiritual in the sense that it's about, if you read the liturgy, it's all about crowning God as a king, which is another way of saying that we come before God and we say we submit our own independent ego and we just want to have a relationship with you. That's the meaning of crowning God as a king in the Kabbalistic interpretation. That it's not about just submission to decide to do God's will, but it's about inspiring God to want to have a relationship with the world. And the way we do it is we really focus and say that we want a relationship with him, and that's all there is, and that's what our desire is, and that's where our pleasure is. And together with that, we say, okay, it's all about you, but could you also give us everything we need? So that seems like a contradiction. And we began the explanation last week, and we solved this problem, and we said it's only a contradiction if it's a contradiction. In other words, yes, it could be that a person's own physical and material needs are a contradiction to their spiritual life and a contradiction to submission before God, and or at least a distraction from the prayer that we ask that God's sovereignty should reign throughout the world. But it doesn't have to be that way. In other words, for the Jew, when the Jew wants material blessing, it's not a distraction or certainly not a contradiction to the relationship with God. To the contrary, it's an extension, because I want to serve God. Therefore, I need to have life, health, blessing, wealth, etc. And that is how I influence the world to fill the earth with the understanding and the knowledge and the awareness of Hashem's kingship. So therefore, it's no longer a contradiction. The two themes of Rosh Hashanah, the idea that I want to reconnect spiritually to God, and the idea that I pray for everything I need in the physical sense, it's not a contradiction. It's an extension. The material blessing is an extension for my spiritual life and my spiritual connection to God. So that was a beautiful interpretation and inspiring in itself. And we could have gone home yesterday and that would be enough already to prepare us for Rosh Hashanah. But today we're going to take it a step further. And we'll say that's wonderful. That's wonderful that there could be a Jew on the state that when he opens up the prayer, he or she opens up the prayer book on Rosh Hashanah and says, God, give me health, give me good life, give me blessing, make my field yield its produce. His intention or her intention is so that I could be able to serve God. And this physical blessing is an extension of my spiritual life. That's wonderful. But I'm not sure I'm on that level. And the prayer book was authored for everybody. So yes, there could be a person who's so spiritual where their physical and physical requests are not a distraction and not a contradiction to the spiritual requests. In fact, it's just an extension of it. But am I on that level? No, I'll be honest with you. I want God to give me breakfast. Okay, maybe I'll serve God also. But it's not that that's my only motivation. I only want physical blessing so that I could be able to serve God. I also feel a little bit of my own ego, my own identity. So what about the people who don't feel that their physical requests are only and exclusively an extension of their spiritual life? So for them, aren't these two themes a contradiction? The feeling of coming before God and submitting before God, and yet reading a shopping list of all the things I want. How does it work together? So you answered that it's possible that they can work together. It's possible that the physical is not a contradiction, but it's an expansion of the spiritual. It's possible. But what about for the people who are not on that level? And like I said, the prayer book was not authored for just the super spiritual people. It's what you give everybody at the door, right? It's what it's Sheva L'chol Nefesh in Hebrew in the Rabbi Shneur Zalman. He wrote his siddur, but others did the same. They write, this is meant for everybody. It's not a sort of a Kabbalistic manifesto. It's meant for everybody. It's accessible to all. So how could you give everybody a text that has these two contradictory themes? The theme of desiring to bring God as king of the world, which means submission to God, and the theme of requesting our own needs, which is focus on self. How could you have those together in the same, woven in the same prayer book, sometimes in the same paragraph, certainly on the same page? Yes, for some people, it's not a contradiction, but I may not be one of those people. And what about the people who want money because they want money, and they want health because they want health, because they like it? So for them, what are you going to do? Now, the Rebbe says something interesting. He says it's actually easier to tell a Jew, it's Rosh Hashanah, just think about God. That would be easy. That wouldn't be a problem. What's hard to tell a Jew is it's Rosh Hashanah, think about God, but also think about yourself, but your needs, but understand that your needs are not for you, it's for God. That's much more complicated. It's easier to ignore the physical needs than to think about them in the context of an extension of spirituality. And here we're saying that this is accessible to all, everybody can do it. So this is the question, this is the issue. This is the question that we have. So last week's interpretation was beautiful, but it's beautiful for some people. What about for everybody? What about for the people who when they ask God for money, when they ask God for physical health, when they ask God for serenity, they're not just saying it so that I could serve God. They're saying it so I can enjoy myself. So for them, isn't that a contradiction to the theme of Rosh Hashanah, which is the theme of submitting and reconnecting to God and not focusing on self, focusing on the reign of God, so focusing on the connection to God. So here we have a very radical interpretation based on the radical teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, and it's absolutely beautiful, but just because it's beautiful doesn't mean it's not radical. Here it goes. This radical teaching of the Baal Shem Tov was based on a verse in Psalms. The verse describes people who have to offer a thanksgiving offering. And it's spelled out, I believe, in Psalm 107. And there are basically four categories of people. If you cross the desert, if you're sick, if you're imprisoned, or if you cross the sea. These are the four categories that the Torah describes, that the Psalm describes, of the people who offer thanks to God. In the biblical times, they would bring a thanksgiving offering. Okay, so there is a verse there amongst the people who were traveling through the desert. Let me see exactly which people are hungry and thirsty. Give me just 1 second. I don't want to say something that's wrong. Okay, so the people crossing a desert. In the desert, there's no food. So I'm reading a few verses from Psalm 107. They lost their way in the wilderness, in the wasteland. They found no inhabited city. Both hungry and thirsty, their soul languished within them. They cried out to the Lord in their distress. He delivered them from their afflictions. He guided them to the right path to reach an inhabited city. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his kindness and proclaim his wonders to the children of man. In other words, they're traveling through the desert. They got lost. They were hungry. God led them back to civilization. Now they have food. Let them thank God. Okay, very straightforward verse. Doesn't seem like anything too radical here. But of course, there is something radical. Let's go back to the Hasidic teaching on the verse. The verse reads as follows. both hungry and thirsty. Their soul languished within them. They're hungry and thirsty, and the soul languished, the soul yearns, the soul suffers. Says the Baal Shem Tov. You know what this verse is telling you? This verse is telling you something radical. When you're hungry or thirsty, or by extension, you have a desire for any physical need, for any physical pleasure, you think you want it because your body wants it. You think you want it for the physical and material benefit, either sustenance or pleasure. But the truth is, as the verse says, they're hungry and thirsty. Why are they hungry and thirsty? Because their soul, in English they transfer language, but their soul yearns. Your soul yearns for the spark of God that is in this physical object that it is supposed to rectify, and it's supposed to reconnect to holiness. So if you go next time you go into the store and you see a nice piece of chocolate cake and you say, I really, really want this. Okay, so what does that mean? The Baal Shem Tov is teaching you that your desire is multidimensional. Externally, what you feel is you want it because you like the way it tastes, or you like the way it makes you feel, or you like the comfort it brings you, or because you're hungry. But deeper than that, there's a deeper dimension where anything you want, it's because your soul wants to connect to the spark and use that object for holiness. So this is a radical interpretation. Now, you may ask me, if I want to do something wrong, does that mean my soul wants to do something wrong? That's a good question. Vicky, go ahead. What's your question?
My question goes back to Chana, because she was clearly asking for a child to be able to raise him God-fearing. So she was clearly not asking for herself.
Right.
What about those parents who don't view children as a gift from God and for selfish needs? So is it like subconscious?
Yes. So we're saying that every person who wants something negative, who wants something physical, I want a physical thing, but there's a deeper reason why I want it. So in my conscious mind, I want it for a either neutral or even destructive purpose. I want to eat the chocolate cake because it fills my pleasure. If it fills my pleasure and it's going to harm me, I'll get a stomach ache. It doesn't matter. But the Baal Shem Tov is saying, if you want something, it's because you're connected to this item and you have to elevate it. Now, the Rebbe doesn't talk about this in this talk, but I think what it means is as follows. It doesn't mean, because Chassidus explains elsewhere, that every single thing has a spark, and every spark has to be elevated. And elevated means you connect the physical thing back to its source, back to its purpose. And when we engage in the physical world and we use those objects and items for a spiritual purpose, we are elevating the sparks, as the Kabbalah discusses and Chabad philosophy discusses as well. But elsewhere it's explained, not in this talk, but elsewhere in the Kabbalah it's understood that there are two ways you elevate sparks. Sometimes you elevate a spark by engaging with it. Sometimes you elevate a spark, actually, ironically, by pushing it away, right? So if there's something that's destructive and it comes in contact, it comes into your orbit, and you know that now the Torah tells me, separate yourself from this, that is how you elevate that spark, because that's how you bring this object to its purpose. The purpose of this object was here to entice you so that you dig deeper within yourself and find the strength and commitment to God and commitment to truth to overcome the negativity. And then that distraction fulfilled its function, which is to make you stronger, right? If it's like going to the gym, you lift a weight, the harder the weight is, the stronger you become. So when I say that when I want the chocolate cake, it means I have to, my soul wants it, that's true. Sometimes it means my soul wants to eat it, and sometimes it means my soul wants to separate it from it. But the bottom line is, beneath the surface, there's a whole spiritual dimension that is in the subconscious, or in the Kabbalah, superconscious. It's above the conscious, not under the conscious. Sub means under. And in that sense, it's when I want something, even if I think I want it for a selfish need, it's true that externally that's why I want it, but deep down my soul wants it for a spiritual need. Now, going back to our question, the sages say, come into shul on Rosh Hashanah. You don't have to come to shul. You can do it in your house. Doesn't matter. Shul is not a mitzvah. Pray to God. And when you pray to God, we want two things to happen. Number one, you want to connect to God in the spiritual sense. You want to make him the king. In other words, you want to submit. You want to say that I want to connect to the source of everything, which is God. My own ego, I want my own ego to be part of the greater essence of God. So I want to lose my own independent identity. I want to forget about myself. On the other hand, ask God for everything you need because you want it. Now, if I'm a very spiritual person, I see those things are not a contradiction, because my desire for physical blessing and physical health and physical material blessing is an extension of my desire to connect to God. And here's the big idea. Even if I don't see it that way, deep down it is that way. So deep down, it's not a contradiction. So the sages say anybody can come and ask for physical needs on Rosh Hashanah, because for everybody, the request for physical blessing is spiritual. For everybody. The only question is it in the conscious mind or in the subconscious mind? But it doesn't matter. In reality, it's not a contradiction, because even if I don't sense it, when I ask God for the physical blessings, it's really my soul asking God for the opportunity to be able to fulfill my purpose in the world and expand the holiness in the world. And therefore, it's not a contradiction, even for those people who don't feel that their physical blessing is an extension of the spiritual life. Even if you don't feel it, that doesn't change what your soul feels. And for your soul, it's not a contradiction.
Thank you, Rabbi. So he clearly talks about the godless soul in this case.
Yes, yeah. Now, the Rebbe says something interesting. There's different parts of the prayer, and the Rebbe says if you go into a shul and you see that there's one prayer in the Chana where that describes the day of judgment and how on this day everything is determined: who will live and who will be tranquil, and who will flourish and who will not, etc. So this is sort of one of the most moving parts of the synagogue, where everybody gets inspired because everyone sees there's a lot at stake. So the Rebbe says, when you see that people are more moved by this prayer, more than the other prayers that talk about the sovereignty of God, it's because for the soul, this prayer, it's also because for the soul, this prayer is more important. In other words, the soul itself is also inspired here because the soul wants the physical blessing and the serenity and the life and the health, because the soul understands the importance of having these blessings to be able to function and fulfill its purpose. So this is sort of, it helps us understand Rosh Hashanah, but this is a radical idea, because what the Baal Shem Tov is teaching us is always to look at the deeper. Just because I want something, I think I want it on one level, but there's always a spiritual story that's happening simultaneously that you have to dig deeper and you have to connect to. Now we can come back to the story, full circle, to the story of Eli and Chana. And again, the question was, how could it be that Eli could misjudge a person who to the extreme, not being oblivious to the fact that they are engaged in prayer in an emotional way, and yet he misjudges her just being drunk? And we already said last week, we didn't explain, but we already said that obviously because of the questions, that cannot be Eli's mistake. Eli knew she's praying. What Eli was upset, Eli thought that she's praying too much. She's intoxicated by prayer. Remember, the third question was, why didn't he stop her? If he thought he was drunk, why did he wait for her to finish praying? He should have stopped her as soon as he thought she's drunk. If someone walks into the temple and they're drunk and they're praying in a disrespectful way, call the security and get them out. Instead, he waits for her to conclude the prayer, and then he says, "Till when are you drunk?" So that led us last week to the conclude that it cannot be that he thought that she was drunk in the regular sense, because then he would call security right away. Instead, he lets her finishing praying, and then he critiques her. He says, "You're not praying properly. You're drunk. Drunk means you're losing your judgment because of your prayer." What does that mean? Eli is saying, you're standing before God. You want to pray, you could pray. But he sees this person is so emotional. He says, you're standing before God. Why are you focusing on your own needs? Isn't focusing on your own needs distracting you from what you should be doing here, was when you come to the temple of standing before God? So he says you're praying too much. So it's not that he thought she's not praying, she's drunk. Of course you're praying, and of course you're praying to God, and of course you're not drunk in the literal sense. And that's why he let her finish praying. But he says, why are you so drunk? Why are you so intoxicated? You're losing your judgment. You're just completely focused on your own need instead of focusing on serving God. Because he saw how she was praying so intently and asking for something specific, even though she did not know what it was. Even though he didn't know, he didn't know what it was. All he knew is here bitali hitpalel, like we said last week. She prayed increasingly, a lot. The word is here bita, which the root is harbe, a lot. She prayed a lot. She prayed too much. He's like, you're praying too much. You're getting too intoxicated in your prayer. Why is praying too much? That's what we said last week. What's wrong with praying too much? So Eli says praying too much means you're focused on self. Okay, you want to come before God, you want to mention a prayer is one thing, but you're coming to God and it's all about yourself, right? That's not a relationship with God. That's that you're just requesting for yourself. What does she answer? What does she answer? She answers that I'm not drunk. I'm pouring out my soul before God. I'm pouring out my soul before God. What does that mean? It means, why am I asking for my requests? Why am I asking for physical blessing? In her case, it was for a child, but it means any physical blessing. Why am I so intensely desiring something physical? This is an expression of my soul. This is a spiritual desire. I want it not only for the physical blessing, but for the spiritual blessing it entails within it. And that's why later when she says that if she'll have a child, she'll dedicate the child to God and bring the child back to the temple. That represents the idea that why does she want the physical need? To be able to serve God. When Eli hears that, Eli understands that for this woman, it's not a contradiction. Praying intensely is not a contradiction. Praying intensely for a specific physical request is not a distraction from God. To the contrary, this is an extension of spirituality, an extension of the soul, allowing the soul to expand its relationship with God in the physical world by living here and bringing the holiness to the physical world. In that sense, as soon as he hears that, even before he hears what she wants, he says, he blesses her, oh, may God answer your requests. Because he sees that what she's really asking, as she says, is an expression of my soul. It's not an expression of something physical. And that is the disagreement. That's what Eli missed. Now, why does Eli miss that? So in the footnote, the Rebbe says, Eli is a priest. A priest, by definition, his job is to be separate and designated from the world. He's supposed to be spiritual. Okay, so he doesn't necessarily have the skill. He helps people become more spiritual, but he doesn't necessarily have the skill to teach people, and he doesn't really understand within himself how you could be spiritual when you're in the world itself. That Chana teaches him. That Chana knows. Chana tells him, even when you're thinking about your own needs, it can be an expression of your soul pouring out itself before God. You want it because your soul wants it. Your soul wants it because that's its purpose in life. To have a child, that's that specific story. But we're saying it that this applies to all or any physical blessing and physical life and physical health in this world. What's the lesson to us? Because one of the questions were, why does the Torah talk about, why does the Torah, why does the Bible, the prophet, the book of Samuel, why does it have to tell me the story how Eli misjudged her? So the Rebbe says something very interesting. When we get up on Rosh Hashanah and we take the prayer book and we start asking for life and for health and for blessing and for the bank accounts and for the stock market to go up and for everything to happen the way we want it to happen, we have to be a little uncomfortable. The Eli of our soul, the high priest in our soul, in other words, the spiritual side of the soul, should really ask us, what's going on here? Why are we getting drunk? Why are we focusing on self? In other words, that's supposed to bother us. That's part of the story, because that's part of the lesson. And then but that doesn't mean we shouldn't ask for the physical blessing. That just means we have to, that's an opportunity to realize what Chana's answer. Chana's answer is that even if I don't feel it, the truth is the reason why I want it is because my soul wants it. So that conversation, both parts of the conversation, both the fact that I feel a little uncomfortable saying, why am I standing, well, if I'm standing before God, if I want to have a relationship with God, why am I focused on my own needs? That should make me a little uncomfortable. That's the Eli asking the soul, why are you so drunk? That's the Eli of the soul, asking myself, why am I so drunk? Why are you so intoxicated? Why are you distracted by, you're oblivious to the presence of God. You're focusing on self. You're like a drunk person. They can't put two and two together. Then we have Chana's answer. And Chana's answer is no. The reason why I'm asking for this is because I'm pouring out my soul, meaning the request is an expression of the soul. The soul wants it to be able to serve God. So in that sense, it's a beautiful story because both parts of the story is what we have to experience when we pray on Rosh Hashanah. We have to be uncomfortable. I'm supposed to be thinking about God. Why am I thinking about myself? And that uncomfortability, that's the protest of Eli, then helps us reach the answer of Chana. That no, it's not a contradiction. Because what I ask for is really an expression of my soul to be able to serve God. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. Finish a little early today, but it's certainly important talk and important idea for life in general, but Rosh Hashanah in particular. So this was good. I hope you enjoyed. Any comments or questions, please share. Otherwise, we'll see each other in good health. I'm just trying to think. Tuesday, Wednesday, next week is Rosh Hashanah. And the following week is the day before Yom Kippur, so we're probably not going to be able to meet. But the week after that, Sukkot, there's a good chance we'll be able to get together and study about the Sukkot. Maybe we'll be in the Sukkah, in Zoom in the Sukkah, or in person in the Sukkah, doesn't matter, but in Zoom also. So it should be a Shana Tova, good year, only happiness, blessing. And don't forget that God should bless you with all the physical blessings, because the way the Hasidim would say, God gives the Jews materialism, and the Jews transform the materialism into spirituality. He gives us physical blessing, and we take that physical blessing and we use it for spiritual causes and to serve God, and then we transform the materialism into spirituality. And therefore, like Chana says, it's not a contradiction. The requests for physical blessings are not a contradiction to our spiritual connection with God. So l'chaim, may the year be full of blessing and holiness, and the blessing, of course, is an extension of our soul's desire.
And to your family too, Rabbi.
Amen. Everybody's family, yes, indeed.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Very much.
Rabbi, can I ask a question related to asking for forgiveness?
Yes, I don't know if I know the answer, but question you can ask.
So I know the general rules around it, but what if there's something that you did in the past and there's no way to contact this person? You know, it's from many years ago, you finally realize what's going on, and then you want to be able to ask forgiveness, but the person, you know, who knows where they are at this point?
Right. I don't know if I know the answer to that question. The Talmud does say, the Mishnah, Rambam quotes it, that sometimes if a person does something against a person and the person that is then deceased, so you can't ask for their forgiveness. So there's a process where a person would go to the grave in the presence of 3 people or 10 people, I don't remember, and ask for forgiveness. So that's one form. If it's a specific person that I can't reach out to, there is an issue where sometimes I sin against somebody, but I don't know who I sinned against. That's one problem, right? And that is, for example, if I take something from somebody, but I have no idea who I took it from, right? So then it's very hard then it's impossible to find out who I harmed, and therefore I cannot ask for a proper apology because I don't know who to request from. Then there's a time where it's just, I can't, you know, today's day, I could track down almost anybody. I could send an email to almost anybody. And someone just sent me a letter a few months ago. I've totally forgot who they were from many, many years ago, that At some point, they were having difficulty in their life, and I reached out to them, and they ignored me. And he sent me a letter a few months ago, apologizing and saying that, oh, I was a hard time in my life. I couldn't respond. But that person now lives in a different country, in a different continent, and he was able to do that. But in general, let's say there's a person I can't. So teshuva in general is turning things back and trying to apologize. What happens if I can't for whatever reason? I don't know who I sinned. I don't know who I harmed. So then the Talmud almost like says it's much harder to do teshuva because there's no one to ask for forgiveness. Okay. So then what does teshuva mean? So there are different interpretations, but one interpretation is then teshuva has to take a different form. Then teshuva means I am not the same person who has done that act. Right? Let's say I, Menachem Feldman, offend you. So there's two ways I can solve this. One way to solve it is come to you and ask for your apology, and you apologize and you forgive me. Okay. But if you can't forgive me, if we can't do it that way for whatever reason, now I don't have access to that form of teshuva. So what do? So the only thing I can do now is say, okay, I'm going to do teshuva internally. I'm not the same person. What does it mean I'm not the same person? When I did it is because I was insensitive, and now I'm becoming sensitive. So in that sense, I'm a new person. If I'm a new person, that's teshuva. So this, I think, is true for all cases when the teshuva of turning the wheel back is impossible.
Thank you.
I don't know if that makes sense. I think that would apply here too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. And in that case, it's probably also like a lesson. If a person learns a lesson and if something like that happens again, that's a new person.
Right, I'm a new person. In other words, I will not, what caused me to respond in a negative way the first time will not happen again because now I am a different person. So why did I do something wrong? Because I'm narcissistic. I don't care about your pain. I just care about my pleasure, right? But if I change that, if I transform myself, then in the same scenario, I would act differently. So in that sense, it was corrected, not because the other person forgave me because I can't locate that person or I can't find that person, but in that sense, I have been transformed.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Wonderful day and Shana Tova, good year, only blessings.
Amen. To you
That's
too.
Thank you. Be well.